December 24th, 1945, Washington, D.C. The telephone rang just after noon. Inside the office, conversation stopped. The war was over. Most urgent calls no longer arrived with the same sense of dread they had carried only months earlier. An aide reached for the receiver, then paused. The call was for General Dwight Eisenhower. He picked up. Nobody in the room could hear the voice on the other end. For 3 seconds, nothing was said. Then a sentence crossed the line. A short sentence. A final sentence. George Patton is dead. Eisenhower did not respond immediately. He slowly lowered the receiver back into its cradle. No questions. No reaction. No visible emotion. He stood from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking Washington. The room remained silent. Everyone knew the history. For years, Patton had created problems that only Eisenhower seemed capable of solving. Headaches, political disasters, diplomatic nightmares, public embarrassments. More than once, people had wondered if Eisenhower spent as much time managing Patton as he did fighting Germany. Many assumed this news would bring relief. Instead, Eisenhower stood at the glass and stared into the winter sky, because the truth was far more complicated. And perhaps for the first time, there was nothing left preventing him from admitting it. Without George Patton, the Allies might never have reached victory the way they did. But understanding why requires going back to a time when nobody knew whether either man would survive the war. 3 years earlier, long before victory celebrations, long before parades, long before newspaper headlines declared the war won, 2 very different men found themselves responsible for one of the largest military operations in human history. Dwight Eisenhower was calm, measured, controlled. He listened before speaking. He preferred cooperation over confrontation. His greatest talent was not commanding armies. It was holding together an alliance filled with powerful personalities who often disagreed. George Patton was the opposite. He moved fast, spoke faster, and thought even faster than that. He believed hesitation was dangerous. He believed momentum won wars. And he believed most people spend too much time discussing problems instead of solving them. They should never have worked together. Yet history placed them on the same side, and the outcome of the war would depend on both. North Africa. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the sun. American forces had suffered embarrassing setbacks. Confidence was shaken. Reports arriving at headquarters were grim. Something had to change. Patton arrived like a storm. Soldiers noticed it immediately. Uniform regulations became strict overnight. Discipline tightened. Excuses disappeared. Standards rose. Some hated him. Many feared him. But results followed. Units that had struggled suddenly began moving with purpose. Officers who had grown comfortable found themselves under pressure. The battlefield changed, and so did perceptions. For the first time, many people began seeing what Patton could do. Unfortunately, they also began seeing what Patton could not do: remain quiet. The problem Eisenhower could never escape. The victories were valuable. The controversies were constant. Every few months another incident seemed to emerge, another headline, another complaint, another meeting behind closed doors. Each time questions returned. Why keep him? Why tolerate him? Why not replace him with someone easier to manage? Many senior officials viewed Patton as a risk, a dangerous one, a commander whose mouth might eventually cause more damage than any enemy. Yet something unusual kept happening. Whenever conversations turned toward removing him permanently, Eisenhower resisted. Not publicly, not dramatically, but consistently. The protection was rarely visible. Most people never saw it. What they saw instead were warnings, reprimands, and disciplinary actions. What they didn't see were the arguments taking place in private rooms. The moments when Eisenhower quietly asked others to consider one question: if war reached its most difficult moment, who would you trust to move fastest? Who would attack first? Who would refuse to accept defeat? The answers often led back to the same man: George Patton. Sicily. The campaign should have been remembered entirely for military success. Instead, it became something else. Patton's battlefield achievements were undeniable. Yet controversy followed him again. Political pressure intensified. Newspapers seized the story. Critics demanded consequences. Washington watched closely. For Eisenhower, the situation became personal. Not because he approved of everything Patton did. He didn't. But because he understood something many observers did not. Removing an ordinary commander was easy. Replacing an extraordinary one was not. That difference haunted every decision, especially when another storm was approaching. England, 1944. Patton walked through the countryside carrying a burden few people recognized. For perhaps the first time in his life, he felt useless. The greatest invasion in modern history was approaching. Preparations filled England. Troops arrived daily. Ships crowded ports. Aircraft covered the skies. And George Patton was not leading the attack. Others received assignments. Others received responsibility. Others moved closer to history. Patton waited. The frustration was visible. The uncertainty was worse. Because he feared one thing more than death: being forgotten. What he didn't know was that his reputation had become a weapon. The ghost army across the English Channel, German intelligence studied reports obsessively. One question dominated their thinking: where would the invasion come? The Allies needed an answer, not a truthful one, a convincing one, and nobody was more convincing than George Patton. German commanders feared him. They respected him. Some believed he was the Allies' most dangerous battlefield commander. That reputation became part of a remarkable deception. Fake camps appeared. Fake radio traffic spread. Fake preparations multiplied. And at the center of the illusion stood Patton. The Germans watched him carefully, exactly as the Allies hoped they would. While attention focused elsewhere, history's largest amphibious invasion moved toward Normandy. Patton wasn't storming beaches that morning, yet his presence influenced events anyway. Even when absent from battle, he shaped it. France. Once unleashed, Patton moved with astonishing speed. Columns rolled forward. Town after town fell behind advancing forces. Maps changed daily, sometimes hourly. The pace stunned observers. Enemy commanders struggled to respond. Opportunities appeared. Patton seized them again and again. Soldiers serving under him often experienced two realities simultaneously: exhaustion and momentum. There was always another objective. Another river, another road, another breakthrough. He pushed relentlessly, not because he enjoyed movement, because he feared stagnation. In his mind, stopping gave the enemy time. And time was dangerous. Winter, 1944. Then everything changed. Snow covered Europe. Temperatures dropped. Visibility disappeared. And Germany launched one final gamble. The Ardennes erupted. Allied lines bent under pressure. Confusion spread rapidly. Reports arriving at headquarters painted a troubling picture. The German offensive had achieved surprise. Entire sectors struggled to understand what was happening. Roads became crowded. Communications faltered. Questions multiplied. The situation grew serious enough that senior commanders gathered urgently. Maps covered tables. Officers studied possibilities. Nobody knew exactly how bad things might become. Then attention turned toward Patton. The meeting. The room was crowded, the atmosphere heavy. Everyone understood the stakes. The discussion focused on responses, timelines, movements, capabilities. Patton listened. Then he spoke. He proposed a maneuver so ambitious it sounded unrealistic. Some thought impossible. He claimed his army could pivot rapidly and strike toward the crisis. The weather was terrible. Roads were clogged. Conditions were brutal. Yet Patton remained certain. Others hesitated. He did not. What followed became one of the defining moments of the war. Because while many commanders discussed obstacles, Patton had already begun planning solutions. Bastogne snow drifted across frozen roads. Engines struggled. Men endured bitter cold. Supplies moved slowly. Everything seemed determined to interfere. Still the advance continued, hour after hour, day after day, toward Bastogne. Inside the surrounded town, American defenders waited. They were tired, cold, outnumbered, but still holding. The question was simple. Could relief arrive before the situation collapsed? Patton's forces pushed forward, not perfectly, not effortlessly, but relentlessly. Eventually, the distance closed, the pressure eased, and one of the war's most dramatic crises began turning in the Allies' favor. For Eisenhower, the lesson was impossible to ignore. Patton could be difficult. Patton could be controversial. Patton could create endless problems. But when circumstances demanded speed, audacity, and determination, few commanders matched him. Perhaps none. Victory months later, Germany collapsed. The fighting ended. Celebrations erupted across continents, families reunited, cities filled with relief. The nightmare appeared finished. Yet peace introduced new challenges. Politics returned. Public statements mattered again. Diplomacy regained importance. And George Patton remained George Patton. Controversies resurfaced. Disagreements continued. The relationship between Eisenhower and Patton grew complicated once more. Neither man was particularly skilled at expressing admiration, especially toward each other. Respect existed, but it often hid beneath frustration. Perhaps that is why certain truths remained unspoken. Neither fully understood how little time remained. December 1945, the accident happened on an ordinary day. No battlefield, no artillery, no enemy attack. Just a vehicle traveling along a road. The collision seemed survivable. At first. Then reality emerged. Patton suffered severe injuries. Doctors worked. Visitors arrived. Rumors spread. The nation waited. Days passed slowly. In the hospital room, the famous general confronted something he had escaped for years. Stillness. No battlefield decisions. No advances. No movement. Only time. And uncertainty. Outside, speculation continued. Inside, life narrowed to conversations, medical updates, and hope. Then hope faded. Returned to Washington, December 21. The telephone call. The silence. The sentence. George Patton was gone. Many observers assumed Eisenhower would finally feel free. Free from controversy. Free from political damage control. Free from the burden of managing an unpredictable subordinate. But standing at that window, he was likely remembering something entirely different. Not headlines. Not scandals. Not arguments. Moments. North Africa. Sicily. France. The Ardennes. The countless occasions when victory seemed uncertain. The countless occasions when Patton moved toward danger instead of away from it. History often reduces people to their conflicts. It remembers disputes, arguments, embarrassments. What it frequently misses are the invisible calculations made by leaders forced to choose between comfort and effectiveness. Eisenhower knew better than most. He had spent years balancing both, and now the balancing act was over. The truth left behind George Patton was not easy to admire, nor easy to defend. Sometimes he made that impossible. Yet wars are not won by personalities alone. They are won by decisions, by actions, by performances under pressure. Again and again, when critical moments arrived, Patton delivered results that altered events. That reality never erased his flaws, nor should it, but neither did those flaws erase his contributions. Perhaps that was the truth Eisenhower confronted as he stared through the glass that winter afternoon. Not that Patton had been perfect, far from it, but that some of the most difficult people in our lives become essential precisely because they possess qualities others do not. Qualities that cannot be manufactured. Qualities that cannot be replaced. And qualities whose value sometimes becomes fully visible only after they are gone. The office remained quiet. The city moved outside. The war belonged to history now. One of its most controversial generals belonged to history as well. And somewhere between relief, regret, admiration, and loss stood a man looking out a window, understanding that the arguments no longer mattered. Only the absence did. Do you think Eisenhower's greatest challenge was controlling Patton, or accepting that the very traits that caused endless problems were also the traits that helped win the war?